God was king over Israel. He ruled over them. He governed over Israel. That's what he did. God's kingship over Israel was one of love, relational. It was something no other nation had. God had established a relationship with Israel as a nation, and he was a king over them, so he governed over them as a nation. God ruled over his people with zeal, with a lot of passion for Israel. But there was one problem that they had. That the problem was that God was a holy God. Okay, he was holy. Okay, and another problem is that since he was holy, well, Israel had sinned. Okay, and there was always conflict between God and Israel because Israel wanted to go follow their own ways, and they had sin in their life, and God was a holy God. So Israel was disobedient, and at times they aroused God's anger, and the Lord would deliver them over to their enemies. So you have the Assyrians and the Philistines and all these enemies going against Israel, and God would deliver them over to them because Israel would sin against God, and it proved that, it showed that God was holy and that they had sinned. God was determined to punish them. He was also determined to keep his covenant promise. God made a promise with Abraham, and he was committed to that. So God required that Israel would be holy. That was God's requirement for his people as a nation, that they would be holy also. So Israel will go as far as replacing the Lord's kingship over them. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 8. They wanted a king. They wanted to establish a king over them, and they wanted to, in one sense, get rid of the Lord as king because God was holy and giving them over to their own sins. So they rejected God as king, and that brought anger. God was angry because they replaced God as king. Okay? And they pinned all of their hopes upon one man. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to pin their hopes upon one man who would rule over them. Okay? And that's exactly what we're going to see in 1 Samuel chapter 17 that happens. Okay? So this infuriates God, who acquiesces to their demands and sets for them a human king. His name was Saul. Saul would disobey God even though God was gracious and giving him the spirit for empowerment. God gave Saul the spirit to empower him for service. That spirit was obviously departed from him. The Lord took away the spirit because he was disobedient. So Saul's disobedience reflects the disobedience of Israel as a whole throughout all the history under God. So again, Saul was no different. They set him up as a king, and he was no different. He was also disobedient towards the Lord. So the Spirit of God would depart from Saul, since God had rejected him. And here's the turning point. It came to rest upon David. Chapter 16, 1 Samuel says that the Spirit of God rushed upon David from that day forward. Who was David? David was a man after God's own heart. We see that he had faith. He was a man after God's own heart, and he found favor with God. So the Lord sent his Spirit to empower him for service. And at this time, given the history, we're going to go ahead and pray. Father God, Lord, we just thank you for the time, Lord, that you have granted us, Lord, to just be able to get in your word, Father, and to expound on it, Father God. We ask that you will open up our eyes, Lord, and just magnify your name, Father God, through your word, Lord, and the great deeds that you have done for us, Lord. We just do ask that you glorify yourself here, Father, that you will help from misinterpretation, Father, and that you would empower me, Father, by the Holy Spirit to rightly divide the word of truth, Lord. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so again, not too long after that, Israel would find herself face to face with an old nemesis. That old nemesis is called the Philistines. Now the Philistines, and we're going to read chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. So what we have here already is the confrontation. We have Israel and we have the Philistines going into battle already. We have a confrontation going on there. Okay, that's on verse 1 to 3. We have a confrontation. Verse 4 we see, and there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion. The Bible calls him a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So they go on to describe all the things that he was wearing. He had a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders, and he was big and 9 feet and one arm. He was a big man, and he was very frightening. Okay, So we have an adversary. We have a confrontation going on with Israel and the Philistines. We have an adversary that stands up in the ranks and defies the ranks of Israel. Verse 8. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So we have a confrontation. We have the adversary, which is Goliath, the giant. Everybody's scared of him, and we have a summons. He summons the people to come out and fight with him. If we see the Philistines they were dependent upon Goliath. Goliath was their champion. So if Goliath lost, the Philistines in essence would lose also, and they would surrender. So we see that the Philistines were dependent upon who? Goliath. That's exactly what Israel tried to do. As replacing God, they were relying just on Saul himself, and they became just like the nations. So instead of relying on the Lord, they relied on who? On Saul himself. And we see that when Saul and all Israel, in verse 11, heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So, here's Israel longing for a king to rule over them, and Saul, instead of standing up, he was afraid. So this shows Israel already that, wow, we asked for a king, and he's afraid at this point. So we have a summons. They summon him to come up, bring the best guy you have, and we'll fight. And if we lose, we surrender. If you lose, you surrender. And we have the response. What's the response? The response is they were fearful. Verse 11 said they were fearful. Verse 24 says, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him and were very much afraid. That's the response that they got from Goliath's summons. So we read now in verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle, and the name of his 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistines came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. So already here we're introduced to a man named David, and by the introduction we see that we know that as I said, David was a man after God's own heart. Okay, and here he is introduced to the actual battle. But this is elsewhere. The battle was taking place somewhere, and then elsewhere what's happening is Jesse is telling his son David to go out and do such and such things, okay? And we see that God is working mysteriously of his providence in somewhere else. And those are things that the Israelites, as they're going to war, they're not seeing these things, what's happening in the background, okay? So we see that God's mysterious providence is working in the background, and we don't know what's going to happen in the text. And so we see that in verse 19, we see now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment, and this is the crucial word here. He came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. So David arrived just in time when the battle was going to ensue. He arrived just in time, not too late, not too early, and that's God's providence at work in the background, how God caused everything to work together at this point so that he can be right at the place at the right time when the battle was going to ensue. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army, and David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. So we got God's mysterious providence working in the background, and in verse 25, we're going to see that there's what we call desperate measures. It says, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel.